Did you ever see a buffalo hiding in a tree? Because they're really good at it.
So this is my Father's Day song, a little bit late because I was on vacation last week, so I didn't do a video. And I spent a lot of time looking for a Father's Day song. This is what I come up with. All right, Bruce Springsteen, "Walk Like a Man." So this song is so on the surface, you listen to the song, you think, oh, this is a nice song about following in your father's footsteps. It's actually about not wanting to follow in your father's footsteps, or in general in your parents' footsteps. So the way I see it, there's like two kind of ways to live your life. There's the people that are doing really pretty good, the people that are kind of got things together in their life. I feel like these are the people that have a model to follow, right? So I'm doing this because this is how my parents did it. This is how my parents taught me to do it, and this is how I'm doing life, right? And they do pretty good, right? Because it's like, to me, this is like having a recipe to follow when you're cooking. Like, it's surprisingly actually pretty easy to cook a good meal when you have a recipe. And it took me a long time to figure that out, because I'm, of course, of the other group of people, right, that if you have a lot of pride and rebellious nature, then you're going to say, well, I don't need a recipe. I'm going to figure it out for myself, and then you're going to spend a lot of time wallowing over, why can I not cook a good meal? My husband's going to leave me. Like, I'm good for nothing. But really just follow the recipe, and you have good results, surprisingly. But so what I'm saying is there's another group of people that live life in this way where you're like, I'm not going to be like my parents. I don't want to be like my parents. Maybe your parents just set a bad example for whatever reason, and it could be like, it's legitimate, like, you don't want to live the way that they live. And so, okay, good for recognizing that. But the problem is when you're like, I don't want to be like my parents, then you know what not to do, but you really don't have a good, clear path for what you want to do, like, or what you should do. So I think that's what's going on in this song. It's like, I don't want to be like my parents. And then this is off of the album Tunnel of Love. It's not, I don't think there's a really single love song on that album, because this is Springsteen, and Springsteen is, this is classic Springsteen. It's very looking at the negative side of things. But this came out in 1987, so I believe Bruce was kind of going through a divorce, a divorce with his first wife at the time. So there's a lot of reflection going on there, and this song kind of comes out of, is really the whole album. This comes out of that, but the song is one of the songs on the album. The title, "Walk Like a Man," so this points us to, and I believe it is a reference to another song called "Walk Like a Man" that is the Four Seasons. This is an oldie that Bruce, being, his dad was in World War II. He was selected for the draft for Vietnam. Ended up not going, but so it's a Father's Day video. So if I can brag about my dad did fight in Vietnam, and my dad listened to oldies, right? So my dad listened to this kind of music, like the Four Seasons. I grew up listening to that kind of stuff. So I feel like Bruce would have known about this song because he would have been from that same time era. Right. So the Four Seasons, Walk Like a Man, this song is about a father and a son. The father is giving the son some advice, telling him to walk like a man, basically telling him to leave this woman that is like not good for him. And so I believe that the Bruce Springsteen song is a reference to that. So where he's saying walk like a man, he's talking about leaving the relationship. And that idea is now kind of guiding him, you know. So now basically he's turning to pop culture to be his role model. And what would Joseph do? So we're gonna ask that question. What would Joseph do? And because we can always take him as our role model. And Mary, you know, we have the Holy Family basically that we can look to if, you know, maybe we're in a situation where we don't have a good role model. So a video about role models.
I remember how rough you ran, felt on my wedding day, and the tears cried on my shoulder. I couldn't turn away. Well, so much has happened to me that I don't understand. All I can think of is being 5 years old, following behind you at the beach, tracing your footprints in the sand, trying to walk like a man.
So to elaborate on what I think the song is about is, it's about a person, you know, maybe taken a little bit from real life, maybe a little bit fictional, you know, we don't know, but I get the sense that the person that the song is about, that their parents maybe weren't very happily married. And so the I don't want to be like my father is I don't want to stay in a relationship where I'm miserable and live a miserable life. That's what he's trying to avoid. That's the I don't want to be like my dad. And in the first verse, he's talking about like his wedding day, how rough your hand felt on mine. His dad's hand was rough because he was in a rough marriage. You know, he was toiling in this marriage. I think that the tears crying on his shoulder could be from the bride, that, you know, maybe either he tried to break it off and she, you know, was upset and he says he couldn't turn away, or that, you know, he's thinking about how upset she would be, and so he couldn't muster up the courage to do that. So he's going along with the marriage, and he's saying, well, I don't know what happened, but I could just remember, you know, being 5 years old, you know, following your footsteps in the sand, basically talking about, for one, setting up the song so that, you know, this is about his parents, right? His dad following his footsteps. But also, I think, in this verse, blaming him and saying, well, I was just kind of following you. All right, so let's turn this around and let's look at what would Joseph do? Okay, so when did Joseph walk like a man? And that was when he took that flight into Egypt with the baby Jesus, with Mary. And because if you really meditate on that flight into Egypt and think about it, like, Joseph would have had family, right? And he would have had a mom and a dad. He wasn't an old man like they always make him out to be. You know, he was a young man. He would have had to have been. Father Don Calloway always makes that point, you know, to make that trek into Egypt, he would have had to have been a strong and young man. So he had a mom that maybe those would be tears, you know, on his shoulder. Don't take my grandson, baby Jesus, away from me. What are you doing? You know, they could have never seen him again, by the time they returned. So, but he would have had to do what God told him to do. He's following what God told him to do. So that's what we got to do, and that's how Joseph is a role model. And that also makes me think of, speaking of my favorite Marian fathers, Father Chris Alar. He always talks about, the tears his mom cried when he, decided to become a priest. She said that she cried for like a week straight, and but he had to do what God was calling him to do. And he had a fiance too that he left behind. It was really hard for him to do, but he was being like Saint Joseph, in this way, following that call on his heart to his vocation. So if you have a vocation to marriage, so in either one of those situations, you can think about Saint Joseph and what he did. So in this verse, he's talking more about his mom. So starts out talking about, by Our Lady of the Roses, which I think is like a made-up church name, because so we know that Bruce Springsteen grew up going to a church called St. Rosa de Lima. So I don't know, I think maybe just change that to Our Lady of the Roses, which is a title for Mary. That comes from a Song of Songs. So there's a couple of lines here that have been compared to as like symbolic of Mary. It's chapter 4, verse 12. My sister, my spouse, is a garden enclosed, a fountain sealed up. So Mary is this enclosed garden, rose garden, enclosed. So you go into this garden. The idea is you go into this garden when you're praying with Mary, and there's peace. There's the peace of Jesus is there. There's these walls, these high walls that shuts out the rest of the world, and so you can focus on Jesus. And this is what we do when we pray the rosary. The rosary is called the rosary because you're in this rose garden and you're praying with Mary and you're focusing on the mysteries, the life of Jesus. Right? Okay. So he's saying that, they lived in the shadow of the elm. So they were by this rose garden, but they weren't in it. They were outside of it, in the shadow. All right, so back to the mom-dad is having this miserable marriage, okay? And he's talking about his mom dragging him to this church to look at these other couples getting married, right? So because on their wedding day they're really happy, he's obviously making the negative point that, this is the last time they're going to be this happy. Like he's thinking, they're going to be miserable. And so, but the mom, I think what he's saying is like the mom is having like these idealistic thoughts about, these beautiful marriages and looking at other couples and like we do this sometimes. We kind of idealize because they step into that long black limousine, the mystery rides, a mystery because we don't know what's going on in their lives, right? But we can kind of have these ideas that they have this perfect marriage, and it's just woe is me, my marriage is terrible, you know. And so she's kind of like looking and comparing and doing that whole thing, and it's making her miserable, you know. So we can't do that. We need to focus on Jesus, okay? And so if we look at this as spending that time with Mary and praying the rosary, then we're focusing on Jesus, then we are not going to be so miserable, right? Like you can have a miserable marriage, you know, like you can be having the worst marriage, but the thing is, and here's, I'm going to read from, this was last Saturday's reading, actually, first reading from 2 Corinthians. 2 Corinthians verse 15. He indeed died for all, so that those who live might no longer live for themselves, but for him who for their sake died and was raised. So if we're praying our rosary and we're focusing on those mysteries, you know, especially, you know, sorrowful mysteries, the passion of Jesus, and you're thinking about how he suffered, for one, you compare your life to that rather than, you know, these, you know, couples on their wedding day, you know, you're going to say, okay, well, maybe I don't have it so bad, you know, for one. And for two, what this verse is saying, you know, you're contemplating how Jesus died for you. You're giving your life to him. You recognize that your life isn't for yourself, it's for him. And then there's all this joy that comes from, even if it's a difficult marriage, it becomes a white martyrdom. You're doing it for his sake, then there's so much joy there, you know, and then that just turns everything around. And then the same thing for, you know, following that track with the priesthood being another vocation, you know, it's the same thing, you know, because priests, you know, they're doing weddings. I'm sure at some point they're like, oh, wow, that might be a nice life. You know, wow, I didn't choose that. I chose this. You know, I'm sure they have those thoughts. But what is going to get them through that is knowing that they're giving their life for Christ. They're not living it for themselves. They're living it for Christ, and the joy that comes from that. You know, that's what we should be focusing on. Of course, in the song, just to finish out this verse, he's talking about, you know, praying for the strength to walk like a man. And I think he's talking about hoping that when the time comes and this marriage goes sour, because of course he's, you know, he wasn't able to turn away. He already said in the first verse, he's like, oh boy, here we go. You know, I'm going to get myself into a mess here. I'm going to end up miserable like my dad. And I hope that I just have the courage to walk away. Yeah, I didn't think there'd be so many steps. I'd have to learn on my own. So that's kind of goes back to what I was saying about when you don't have a role model. When you take that track of like, okay, well, I'm not going to be like my parents, then you end up having to learn on your own. And that's exactly what he's saying. And then when he talks about your best steps stolen away from you, you can look at this and think, it could be like maybe like the dad, maybe died young or something like that. But I think based on, if this was a true story or semi-true story with Bruce from his life, so we know from his memoir that his dad did finally get up and leave. He left and he went to California, but the wife, Bruce's mom, went with, and then like the younger daughter when he was 20 years old. Bruce was 20 years old. And so I don't know, I kind of think maybe that's what he's talking about, like his best steps being like he actually finally, did a thing, because he was so, like Bruce talks about his dad was like, I guess really depressed. Or he suffered with depression, and Bruce suffers with depression, and that's why we have songs like this. I think, but yeah, I think that he got up and left, and but the woman went with, and so that's the stuff's being stolen away from him, where it's like, yeah. Or it could be, talking about the church, talking about his faith, because maybe he's blaming the church, for his dad's depression, because maybe he thinks that he was putting up with this miserable marriage because he had to, because we're Catholic and we don't believe in divorce, and maybe that's the stuff's being stolen away from him. And then again, kind of blaming the dad, because he says, well, I was young, I didn't know what to do, so I don't know. I feel like the song is really just I think it's Bruce's way of coping with the divorce, and telling himself, this is the manly thing to do. I don't know. I don't know the situation, who initiated, but it just sounds like from what he's telling the story. He's telling the story of a man who probably didn't want to get into the marriage to begin with, probably had his doubts, was scared of living a life like his parents that was miserable in their marriage, but went through with it because he couldn't, couldn't turn away, because he didn't want to upset anybody, and blames his dad for being that way, and saying, well, I was just following your footsteps. Then talks about his mom being how she was, and contributing to his apprehension about his own marriage, and just thinking, well, I hope I can not be like my dad and my mom, and actually just break this off if I start to be miserable, or when that day comes. It sounds like he knew it was going to come, and then the after fact, like, yeah, well, I had to do the thing. So, because he was influenced by, this other song, and who knows what else. But, all right, that's it. That's all I have. So, yeah, it's important to have a good role model. It's important to have a recipe when you're cooking. It's just gonna make for a better outcome. I mean, we can be rebellious and prideful and think, oh, I'm just gonna figure it out on my own, and I'll learn the hard way, and that's gonna make for a better story, or whatever. And but there's gonna be a lot of stumbling around and mistakes being made, and then you have to deal with that or live with that, the consequences. So that's pretty much the moral of the story. Share my video, subscribe and all that. Tell your friends.